Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode. I have three questions I want to dive into for this episode. And so let's dive into them. So the first one is, so this wasn't a specific question I had, but this was more so things that I've been seeing pop up and like people will ask different forms of this question. And it's, I feel like I'm plateaued because my calories are too low, right? So what you'll commonly see here is someone thinks, oh, hey, I'm not losing body fat because my calories are too low. Okay. And again, this is not the case. Okay. You're not weight plateaued, or the other thing, I was like, oh, I'm gaining body fat because I'm eating too little. And again, that is not the case. The only way that this could potentially be the case is if you've already lost, say, around 10% or more of your body weight. Then if that's the case, then chances are, yes, you may be consuming too few calories, and like your body is just, again, adapted to that, and it's harder for you to continue to drop weight, right? And you may find that if maybe you just your calories are, you try to eat your like super low calorie all the time, and then again maybe on the weekends or something like that you consume a little bit more, you may be putting yourself in a position where you're not, like, depending on what you do, where maybe you have these weeks of where you track, and then you have weeks or days where you're consuming really high calories because you're just like super hungry from weight loss or whatever it may be. Then you could potentially be gaining some body fat in that process. So that's the only way that you're going to be plateaued because your calories are too low is if you've already lost weight. Again, if you're at a higher body weight and you haven't lost weight recently and your body weight's just not trending down, like, you are not plateaued because you're eating too little. I'm going to go over why you may feel like this is the case, but again, in order for you to actually be plateaued at too low of calories, you have to have had to already lost weight, because again, it's not like you can't get into a deficit and then your body's not going to drop body fat. Again, like I said, the only way that could potentially be happening is if you have already lost 10% of your body weight here, and which this is ends up typically being the case here in these situations, right? You're usually worried about seeing your scale weight come up at all, or you haven't taken a break from fat loss dieting. So you may have a slightly suppressed energy expenditure slash metabolism, right? So again, in the weight loss process, when we drop weight, you are going to see your energy expenditure decrease. And then depending on what we do in that process, we can make this worse, or again, it just may be a little bit lower. Some people see higher kind of reductions during that period of time. Some people see less. It just depends. And again, our methods are super important. So in terms of just dropping weight, like, you're a smaller body, so basically you're expending less energy because of that. So again, that's something that we don't really have control over. But where you really see people decrease their overall caloric energy expenditure is from non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And this is mainly going to be genetic, but a lot of times people won't track this and they'll end up moving less throughout the day subconsciously. So again, it's like moving less in general, like you're not getting as many steps, but also like subconsciously where you're not, maybe you're blinking less or blinking slower, talking a little bit slower. You're just generally a little bit more fatigued. That's where you're going to see the biggest kind of decrease there. Now, the good news here with this is just because it's slightly suppressed right now doesn't mean that it's always going to be suppressed. If we can actually spend some time increasing our caloric intake, we can ramp things back up from there. But again, if we're always like trying to maintain the super low body weight and eating low calories to maintain that low body weight, you are probably running into some issues to where you're going to feel like you're really low calorie and you're just plateaued and you can't really go anywhere. So it's like, where do I go from here? But again, the big thing being that the main takeaway so far that I want you to think about here is, if you haven't lost weight recently and your weight is plateaued, it's not because you're consuming too few calories. So if you haven't lost that much weight or are gaining extra body fat, the issue isn't eating too little. It's likely that, one, you're eating more calories than you think. Again, with tracking, like, we know that just because you track, that's, again, tracking, and I'm actually going to go over this today in this episode, tracking can be helpful, but again, it's not an exact science. It's a skill, and it takes time to develop, right? And people, again, are most of the time, 9.99% of the time are going to 99.9% of the time are going to under report their calories. They're not going to over report. It's going to be under reporting, right? And again, it just comes down to, it comes down to consciously, hey, you have half a pizza and you're like, oh, okay, I'm just going to put one slice of pizza in there and it's 350 calories. It's okay. Hey, that was probably 1200 calories. So there's just general, what's the word? I can't think of the word here that I want to say, but you think things are better than what they really are, right? I don't know. I can't think of that. So there's that. But then there is just general like ignorance, and ignorance being like, hey, you just don't know. So again, whether you forget to track something, or again, you don't realize that, hey, I do need to track that, or maybe my serving sizes are off, or hey, I go out to eat pretty regularly. Again, those are going to be things that are going to impact that, and it can make your caloric intake under what you really think. So somebody may be thinking, hey, I'm eating 1,200 calories. Really, when you dive into it, if we were to actually like look, see what they're actually consuming, it's probably somewhere between 1,600 and 2,000, right? And again, that's the difference between you dropping weight and you maintaining. So again, you're like, hey, I'm tracking 1,200 calories and now I'm stuck. I can't lose weight. It's because I'm eating too little. Again, that's not the case, right? So we know that starvation mode is not a thing. Again, your metabolism will suppress, but again, that requires that you actually lose some weight initially in that process for that to actually happen. And again, it's not like it's not going to adapt by to where, oh, hey, you have to eat 600 calories. Like it's the process isn't going to be that extreme until again you get to these really. I would imagine if somebody really tried to diet forever and they were like just again they didn't have access to food again. I would imagine that at some point your amount of calories that your body would need would probably go down pretty significantly over time. But again, most people aren't going to get to that point because again, we have this abundance of food around and at some point someone's gonna be like, hey, you got to eat, you need to get some help or something like that. So again, you're just consuming more calories than you think. And most people are gonna be like, no, that's not me. I track everything. Look, this is just something that if you are eating that low calorie and things aren't changing, like you really need to dive deep into, okay, I'm overlooking some things here. And again, there could be that genetic outlier that really does need to drop calories really low to drop weight. But typically that's going to be someone who's at a really low body weight. And again, they just hit the genetic lottery in the opposite end of where, okay, they just need to consume really low calories to drop body fat or to drop weight. But again, most people aren't going to need to be super, like they aren't going to need to go that low. But there are potentially some people. And again, most people are going to think they're that special snowflake, and most of the time are not. There's just, again, the big thing here is before you say something's wrong with you or whatnot, look into these things. So again, it's like tracking small amounts, skipping details like bites, sips, or condiments. These things can all quickly add up. Alcohol is another big one where people like don't really think about alcohol. And then again, if they do drink alcohol, then they don't think about the things that they do after they consume that alcohol, right? So again, these are all things we want to look at. The other thing is your tracking or consistency needs work. So again, if you're tracking 5 days a week and maybe you are super accurate with your tracking, you're hitting 1,500, you do well, weekend comes around, you're less consistent with your tracking, and you feel like you're not really eating too much different. You are enjoying yourself. You're going out to eat, having some drinks, but you feel like, hey, I'm conscious of what I'm doing. I'm not really trying to eat less. Or maybe you're someone who just, you have no focus. Either way, both of these could get you to the point to where it's super easy to overconsume calories when they are more calorie dense, right? So again, if we're eating things that are super tasty because, hey, we were on track over the weekend, we do that 2-3 times over the weekend, these things start to add up to where now you could potentially be closer to your maintenance or like a really small deficit to where you don't notice anything changing there. Or again, if you're someone who doesn't, you get super hungry during the week because you're tracking, you're restricting yourself, and then on the weekend you let loose, you can easily overconsume calories to where now you're at maintenance or maybe even a surplus. So then you end up gaining body fat over time because it really is easy to consume 3,000-4,000 calories in a day if you're not careful with what you're doing in today's modern environment with all the amount of calorie dense foods that we have. So again, in both of these situations, it's someone thinks that they're only eating 1,200 calories, but again, there's these things that kind of slip through the cracks and it ends up getting you to closer to your maintenance. And then again, it's, oh, hey, also I'm plateaued because I'm not eating enough, when really it's the tracking thing and you can just somewhere along the lines, you're consuming too many calories. Again, I know that's not what somebody wants to hear, but again, that's the case. And then on top of it, the more things that we have, again, the higher our body fat levels are compared to the amount of muscle we have, hormones start to get dysregulated. Okay. And that can start to impact your total daily energy expenditure. So then you do have this slightly suppressed total daily energy expenditure because of that. And so you, unfortunately, like that, those numbers could change a little bit as well too. But again, it's not that you are going to be stuck because you're eating 1,200 calories, right? Or because you're eating too little. Again, it's just like, hey, you may have to eat a little bit less than you think to actually drop weight. That could be part of it. You need to improve your tracking. There's multiple things that could go on here with this. Again, it's a genetic thing, but also, again, not only body fat, but also like things that we do throughout the day. So if your sleep's poor, stress is super high, maybe the way you like go about training and your nutrition, those are things that can slightly lower your total daily energy expenditure, which would impact how many calories you need to drop weight or to maintain weight there. So again, these are why these things are super important as well in this process. So again, in theory, you could be eating too little at times, which increases hunger, and then you subconsciously or consciously eat more to compensate. So I'll hear this a lot where, maybe somebody skips 2 meals. They're super busy, they skip 2 meals, so then they feel like they're eating less, but then they just go hog wild at their last meal of the day. They consume 3,000 calories. It's okay. yeah, you're skipping meals, but that's causing you to overeat later on because you're so hungry, and then you have tasty food because you're super hungry, and then it's this vicious cycle, right? So if you feel like you're eating less, but you're actually, or you feel like you're skipping meals, you're not eating as much, but you're actually consuming more calories. So it's, yes, eating too little at certain times could be the case, but you end up over consuming at some point in, let's say, the week time span. So again, someone tracks 1,200 calories a day during the week, gets super hungry, then doesn't track on the weekends and has a tougher time moderating because of low calories during the week, and then overconsumes calories on the weekend, right? And the worst part about this is this approach will also lead to worse body comp outcomes, in my opinion, right? So less muscle and more body fat, because we're having these times where we're super low calorie. Again, maybe depending on what we do in that process, maybe it's not great from a lean body mass perspective. And then you maybe lose a little bit of muscle, or again, you're not putting yourself in a good position to add more muscle. And then you have these short periods of time where you really overconsume calories. And again, it's more likely that is going to lead to body fat gain, right? So it's maybe losing a little bit of muscle in this process. And then also your weekends are causing you to gain a little bit of body fat, even though maybe your weight's staying the same or slightly, whatever it may be, right? So again, it's also going to lead to a worse body comp in this process. So we need to really look out for these things. And again, someone will be like, hey, I increased my calories and I started losing weight. What typically happens in that situation is two things that could happen. One, somebody, now they're eating, let's say they were at 1,200, weren't losing weight. They get to 1,600. Now they start losing weight. Well, you look and maybe their adherence throughout the week has improved. So then now that's improved. And now they're actually eating 1,600 calories. And that's like their average for the week versus doing 1,200 and then doing 4,000 on the weekends. And then it averages out to maintenance. And then one thing you will see is maybe somebody has been eating super low calorie for a while and their body's adapted to that. Again, usually you would have to lose weight in that process for you to be there. And then things have slowed down, and then you increase calories, and now your body becomes a little bit more. Earlier I talked about NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, decreasing. For some people, when you increase calories, that will start to ramp up a little bit. And sometimes increasing calories can take stress off the body if you've been consuming low calories. So it's like that stress, you lose water weight. People assume that's fat, but it's again just stress coming off the body there. So those are some things that could potentially happen if you've done that and you've seen your calories drop off, or you increase your calories and you've seen your weight decrease. All right, so 3 weeks on, 1 week off approach for fat loss. So yes, this can totally work. This is essentially utilizing diet breaks, which I've talked about. So again, we have diet breaks, we have refeeds. So diet breaks are typically like a week or longer at maintenance calories during a fat loss diet. And then we have refeeds, which are multiple days throughout a week of being at your maintenance calories fat loss diet. Okay. And so again, this can totally work. And I'm a huge fan of implementing these things, right? Just like we need lighter weeks in the gym, same thing here. It's essentially the same thing. And again, in the research, when it comes to deloads, it didn't necessarily increase gains, but you didn't lose any gains by doing it. And to me, it's the same thing here with utilizing these things. There's not going to be anything physiologically that's going to necessarily increase fat loss. But again, it's as long as you manage it well, you're not going to go backwards, but it's also not necessarily it's not going to increase fat loss either. But over the long term, if it allows us to be more sustainable with what we're doing or to adhere to what we're doing long term, it could lead to more fat loss. Same thing with, hey, if you always just go super hard with your training and you never take a deload, yeah, you might make more progress in that period of time, but long term, what's that going to look like? Do you end up maybe burning out? Same thing here. It's like in the short term, you may lose less fat by doing this, but in the long term, can you adhere more? And then because of that, you lose more body fat. So again, it can certainly work, but the key is how you handle these off weeks. Okay. So again, you need to maintain maintenance calories, which can be tough depending on how you respond to a calorie deficit and your method. So some people, when they get in that restrictive state, they come back, they maybe take a break, and then for them, they go crazy with it. For you, that might not be great. We need to look at that. Are there different approaches we can take versus an entire week off? But you need to make sure that you are at your maintenance calories. I guess the other thing would be how aggressive you are in those like other weeks that you are actually fat loss dieting. But from a mental standpoint, this approach may be better for some people. It takes some of that pressure off of feeling like you need to be on 100% of the time, right? So again, we need to look at that. Now, the downside though is that fat loss overall may be a bit slower because that's not a week that you're going to be in a deficit. But some people naturally do this without realizing it. So again, working with clients, it's like this week wasn't really good. This happened, that happened. They weren't really able to stay on top of their nutrition and they lose some weight, then things plateau. Again, you just see this naturally happen for a lot of people. Now, the key though is if we can have this pre-planned break in there and we manage it, is that something that in turn will lead to you not over consuming in those off weeks, right? Because a lot of people, the only downside with people naturally doing this without realizing it is that usually they feel bad about being off plan. So then they say, screw it. And then they go way over. So here with this, we're just taking it to that next level. Okay, you don't have to be fat loss dieting. We still want to have some sort of moderation in place here for this. In saying this, I'm a much bigger fan of like multiple days at maintenance versus like entire weeks. But there are pros and cons to each one. So again, I personally would rather have somebody do like 1 to 3 days at maintenance versus entire weeks. But like preference is key here. If this is something that you've never tried, you want to give it a shot, I definitely think it can work. But again, I just like having those kind of optional days in there if we need them versus this pre-planned, hey, I'm going to do it this way. Now, again, if you're someone who struggled with adherence, maybe you give this a shot to see. Again, if I'm working with someone, I would much rather, we have this conversation, right? We go over the pros and cons, but I would much rather be like, hey, let's give you the option of 2 to 3 days during the week versus taking an entire week off. Now, again, if you go on a trip or something like that, okay, that's a different conversation that we have and we can make this work, right? But again, there's pros and cons to this approach. And again, if you've never tried it, it's interesting to you, give it a shot. Again, I think in the research, when they do things like this, I think the Matador study is one of them. I think it was like 2 weeks on, 1 week off. Maybe it was 3 weeks. I don't know. Generally speaking, though, it was like 2 weeks on diet, 1 week off versus people dieting straight through. And they did find that from a mental standpoint, it might be a little bit better. They were a little less hungry. They felt a little less diet fatigue. But obviously the downside is it took them longer to lose the same amount of fat as people that dieted straight through. I don't know if they had like adherence or dropout rates or anything like that, but that would be something interesting to look at because again, that's part of it. To me, if they had better adherence in the diet break one, that's obviously a really good sign there that it works. So fat loss could be slower unless you are more aggressive during those weeks that we are on. So this would be same thing if you're doing, if we're breaking this down into a week, if we have 2 refeed days, somewhere along the line, we would probably, we either would be okay with slower fat loss or we would decrease the deficit on those days that we're dieting. So maybe be 5 days a little bit more aggressive versus 7 days a little less aggressive, right? Or again, same thing here. You could do 3 weeks at the same deficit, then you take a break, or you could do 3 weeks a little bit more aggressive and then take that diet break. Now, again, either approach can work. It just really depends on you and how you can adhere. And again, maybe it's a little bit of trial and error with this. Maybe you try a little bit more moderate first and then your maintenance, and then maybe see how that goes. And then maybe next time it's like, hey, I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive, and then I'm going to see which one works best for me. But if we decide to go a little bit more aggressive in our caloric deficit, we want to make sure we're eating enough protein. If you get overly aggressive, it's probably going to be similar to a protein sparing modified fast because we need to make sure we eat enough protein. Micros are going to be super important. So probably using like a multivitamin during this time, really making sure you're eating a diet that's mostly whole food. If you're just eating mostly processed foods during this time, you're going to struggle, right? So again, we want to make sure that we're going to be in a deficit, but we want to make sure we're not in a nutrient deficit. We want to make sure that those are in a good spot. And again, how you respond is super key. So if you find that being more aggressive causes you to have a really hard time managing in the diet break week, you may need to look at that, right? So again, we could speed up that fat loss if we're a bit more aggressive, but again, there's pros and cons to that. And again, these are all things that I chat about with clients in terms of, okay, let's figure out what works best for you. And again, some of it is trial and error. We just need to see what works best for you. All right, so final question of the day is other ways to track nutrition besides tracking calories. Like this, I think this is a great question. So first I want to go over what's the importance of tracking calories. Like, why do we do that? I think people they don't really think about why they're doing it. It's just like, hey, I'm just going to track my calories. I need to do this because so-and-so does it. They have no idea why they're doing it, what it means there. So I think it's important. So to me, one of the main benefits is awareness of intake. Most people underestimate or misjudge portion sizes. So tracking can highlight patterns in eating and reveal areas of overeating or undereating. And again, it helps align food choices with your goals, right? So ensuring you're eating enough, but not too much to support fat loss, muscle gain, or maintenance, whatever we're in, right? So again, it's huge that we have that awareness of intake. It gives us objective data to make adjustments, right? Because again, it gives us, it's just a way to quantify how much you're eating, right? So what are calories? Again, it just tells us again, a way to objectively quantify how much we are consuming there. So again, it can give us that awareness of our intake. It gives you education about food, right? And teaches which foods are more calorie dense versus more nutrient dense. Helps you learn portion sizes and how to balance meals for long-term sustainability. And it can identify small swaps that can save hundreds of calories. So again, if we're getting that information, hey, I'm struggling to drop weight. What's going on? Hey, let's look at your food log. Oh crap. Okay, look at that. Again, you're over consuming calories, but then this is a great way to get more volume in, but less calories, right? So it gives you that awareness. It allows for some flexibility and balance, right? So it encourages flexibility instead of restriction, allowing room for tasty foods without derailing progress if we can track it. And again, because gets you away from that black or white thinking in terms of food. Accountability, right? It helps build consistent habits around meals and portion control. Clients do often make better choices when tracking compared to untracking days, right? So it just gives you that extra sense of accountability, because if you're not tracking, it's just there's nothing that's you can tell yourself any story you want. Whereas if you track it, it's hey, it's there. So again, it adds a layer of accountability. And it's a great learning tool, right? So tracking is a skill that improves with practice and doesn't have to be forever. So again, we don't have to necessarily track our calories forever, especially if we take time to really learn this skill. It helps transition to potentially intuitive eating by building a foundation of awareness and portion control. And you can track during specific phases like fat loss, and you can step back during maintenance, again, whatever. And it makes it a flexible tool where we don't have to do it all the time, right? So again, calorie tracking to me is the most effective tool for creating awareness, accountability, and education around food. It's not perfect. We know that calorie tracking can be off, but it's a skill and it can get better. But it helps you learn how to make informed decisions, and it can create a healthier relationship with food if we go at it the right way. To me, it's the best tool out there to quantify all these things for all the reasons I mentioned. But for some people, certain times don't lend themselves well to tracking. Maybe it is just too much for you, whatever it may be. The good news is there are other ways to quantify your caloric intake. But what I will say is this, to me, this is going to be the one that's going to give us the best data. So it's if a client comes to me and they're like, I really don't want to track. Okay, that's fine. But here's the downside of you not tracking. So if we can have you get uncomfortable and really track this for, say, 3 to 6 months, it's going to set you up to be able to do these things much more effectively. Whereas if we don't do this, we just have to understand the trade-offs of like things are going to be potentially less accurate. So if you run into a plateau somewhere and things aren't changing, it's harder to make adjustments, right? So again, if a client like tracks 3 days a week, or they aren't tracking at all because when they're like, hey, I want to continue to get bigger, or I want to build more muscle, or I want to lose more body fat, what's going on? It's somewhere along the lines we're probably consuming too many calories, but it's hard to know what that is if we don't track calories. So that's why it's important to do it. And I think it's important to go over that because most people just do it blindly without knowing why they're tracking their calories and what it means. So let's talk about some ways that we can track our food without tracking macros and calories, right? So again, we can utilize this if we don't want to track, or we need to take a break, or whatever it may be. So you can use hand portions, okay? Your hand is proportional to your body size, so making it a simple way to estimate portions. Again, it's not going to be 100% accurate. It's, a little hard. It's your hands, but is a way to measure your portion. So it's, hey, if you do this at each meal and you're not dropping weight like you want, again, maybe hey, instead of 2 fist-sized portions or 2 cup-sized portions of carbs, I'm just going to do 1, right? Again, that's a way to quantify your overall caloric intake. So then you can add it up throughout the day. Again, it's not going to be the most accurate because, for example, you could do just, let's say we do palm size protein. You could do a chicken breast, or you could do, and then you do chicken thigh. Chicken thigh is probably going to have a little bit more calories there, serving for serving. A lean cut of steak versus a fattier cut of steak, right? So again, this is where it's not precise. So you would probably still want to pair this with something else, whether that be how many meals you eat per day, or your body weight, which we'll talk about that. You can follow the plate method, where you fill half your plate with veggies, a quarter with protein, and a quarter with carbs or starch, and add a thumb-sized portion of fats for balance. So again, similar to hand portions, again, this is just a way to quantify meals. So then again, you could pair this with, hey, I'm going to eat 3 meals a day. And then from there, it's like you have an idea, and then you can quantify it, and then you can take away if need be. You can focus on habits over numbers. So it's, hey, I'm going to eat protein at every meal. I'm going to stay hydrated. I'm going to stop eating when I'm 80% full. I'm going to make sure I include at least 1 serving of fruit and veggie per day or in each meal, right? Again, these are ways that can help you manage your overall caloric intake. But at the end of the day, we aren't getting those exact numbers. So if we're stuck, we don't know for sure what's going on, right? But it can be a way that kind of displaces some of these foods throughout the day. Again, I would still pair this with something else, some other form of tracking as well too. You could do food journaling. You could track what you ate, when, and how you felt before and after meals. Again, this is going to build awareness of habits and emotions without obsessing over numbers. So you do get some data of, hey, here's what I'm eating. And then again, we don't know the exact numbers, but at least gives us an idea of what you're eating, and we can move you towards better food choices. You could do pre-planned meals, so prep meals ahead of time to simplify decision-making, stick to 3 to 4 meals per day, and avoid random snacking. So having a set amount of meals per day. So this is where I'm saying like, hey, I would pair this with something else. For me, the big thing is like choosing an amount of meals that you can eat per day and sticking to that is just super helpful, right? That's a great way to quantify how much you're eating throughout the day. And again, you compare this with, say, hand portions, because then again, you're getting a lot of things dialed in. Again, it's not going to be, you're not going to have those precise numbers, but again, you have a better idea. And again, it's a way to quantify it. You can use a hunger fullness scale. So stop eating when hunger is at a 3 or 4. Or okay, so when you're hungry, depending on how, yeah. So when you start eating when hunger is at like 3 to 4, you're like moderately hungry. Stop when fullness reaches 1 to 2. Again, you compare this with pre-planned meals. Hey, I'm going to have 3 meals per day around this time. Starting to get a little hungry. Hey, my meal's coming up in an hour. I'm going to eat soon. And then you eat. And then you pair it with, hey, I'm going to have a source of protein at each meal. And then once you get full, you're at a 1 or 2. It's, hey, I'm done eating. So that's, again, a way that we can start to pair multiple of these things together. Protein and fiber goals. Prioritize 30 grams of protein per meal and include high fiber foods to support satiety and body comp goals. Another one we can do is time restricted feeding. So limit eating to a specific window. So again, you can only eat for 8 to 10 hours. So again, pairing this with how many meals you eat per day or portion sizes, again, this can be a great way to go about this, right? I would say ideal windows range from like 6 to 8 hours for fat loss phases, and make sure you're getting enough protein intake and focus on whole foods, right? We don't want to just go crazy with this, but time restricted feeding can be a way to cut off like a meal, which can in turn lead you to eat less calories, and just a way to make sure that you don't overconsume calories, right? So again, there's that. Another thing that we can do is cut out a food group. So again, if you're like, hey, I'm not going to have any processed food, or hey, I'm not going to have carbohydrates. Again, that is or certain foods, right? Hey, sweets, I'm not going to have that. That's another way to control your caloric intake without having to track your exact calories. Now, again, that's going to come with a lot of potential down. Like you could not have sweets, but then you overconsume other highly palatable calorie dense foods, and you could overconsume calories, right? Another thing too is we want to track progress without numbers. So we want to look at weight trends, step counts, overall activity, and adjust as needed. If fat loss stalls, we can reduce portions or adjust meal timing, right? So again, this is why calorie tracking to me is the best tool, because it gives us the most data to go off of, whereas everything else, it's going to come with some potential error. But the pro of that is it's can be a little less time consuming and less repetitive as tracking your calories can. And again, even tracking calories is going to come with with risk as well too. Just because you're tracking calories doesn't mean you're 100% accurate. As we know, you're probably not going to be. But again, it gives us a better idea there. So hopefully this gives you more insight into like other ways that you can track besides just tracking calories. And now you know why it's important to track calories, at least for a period of time. And then if you decide you don't want to do that, now you have tools to know that you can adjust if need be there. That's it for this episode. As of this week, this is the final week to enroll in the winter cohort of Body Recomp Blueprint Coaching, one-on-one coaching program. So again, if you're interested in that, if you want to take an approach that focuses on body comp, which to me is the most important, and your overall health too. That's another big aspect of the coaching program. So again, if you're someone who, again, you've been doing the dieting and gaining phases, and you're just not happy with the way you look, maybe you just are in a rut and you don't feel like you're taking care of yourself as well, your routine is off, maybe your energy just isn't there from day to day, or you're just feeling sluggish and just not like yourself, then this coaching program is for you. If you want to find out more information, you can fill out the call link in the show notes, set up a call. We can chat to see if the program is for you, or reach out to me on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. We can chat about it in more details. Appreciate everybody who listens to this. Hope this was helpful. I'll talk to you soon.